I'm going to deal with this as we proceed, but before we explain what is represented by that up there, I want to remind you from the studies yesterday, day before, but it's from the studies of this series that I'm arguing, and I don't have to argue. If you read the 7 articles by Hiram Edson on the 2520 that were published in 1856, you'll see that Hiram Edson is arguing, not singular, not just one time. It's a theme in his articles that the key to opening up the increase of knowledge, the light that is the increase of knowledge, you could even say it that way, when the book of Daniel is unsealed, is the 2520. You could argue, well, so what? He's Hiram Edson. Maybe he was wrong. I'm not arguing that part. I'm just simply saying that Hiram Edson in those articles is giving the prophetic justification for putting the 2520 into the role of being the truth that unlocks all these other truths that are represented by the increase of knowledge at the time of the end when the book of Daniel is unsealed. And therefore, when we were dealing with that chiastic structure over there in this series before we got here, a little bit since we've been here, my argument is that in our history, what the understanding of the 2520 time prophecy did in Millerite history will be repeated in our history by the understanding of the 126, which is a symbol of the 2520. So I've been trying to put that in place. I haven't spent as much time as I would want to with 1863 in terms of nailing down. I think we all understand it. But in 1863, William Miller's dream reaches the point to where his precious jewels are being troubled. But it's a progressive in his dream. It's progressive troubling. And I'm arguing 1863 is the beginning point because his first prophetic understanding, the 2520, is set aside by Adventism in 1863. And this represents a scattering that takes place in Adventism that has been typified by the scattering that preceded 1798 and the Millerites. There's a scattering that precedes both the Millerite history and our history. Theirs was the 2520, ours was the 126. Therefore, when you get to the conclusion of the 126, just as when you got to the conclusion of the 2520, you should expect to see prophetic truths. If Hiram Edson is correct, and he is, you should expect to see prophetic truths associated to the 126 begin to surface, and we have evidence of this. It's happening all over the place. So in the presentations here, one of the reasons that on this board over here I had a line for 1863, and we took some time to note the prophetic characteristics of 1863, whether it was rebuilding Jericho or the health message arriving or the beginning of the church. I was wanting us to understand that this is a waymark that possesses all those characteristics. Therefore, when this 126 begins at that point, when you get to the end of that 126, because Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning, once again, at the end of the 126, you would have all these prophetic references, characteristics from the beginning that you would expect to see occurring at the conclusion of the 126. But we understand that the 126 it gets applied to our history in 2 ways. It begins in 1863 and it ends at the time of the end in 1989. And the other one begins in 1888 and ends in 2014 with the arrival of the third angel. So if there is a increase of knowledge at the conclusion of the 126, then you should expect to see, if this logic is true, an increase of knowledge in 1989 and also an increase of knowledge in 2014. Okay, so I want you to see that when we're going into this. I want to show you something now that I intended to put into place that isn't so much directly connected with this prophetic structure that I'm putting over here, but it's just part of the logic that I'm putting in place. Once we got to 2005 and we began to look at the 2520, so many prophetic truths began to surface. it's just amazing, and none of them that I know of have ever been finalized, where you get right down to the rock bottom and wrap your mind around everything connected to it. Not that you could as a human being, but much light began coming to the surface. And one of the things that began coming to the surface because we went back to the old past, because we reached this history, there's things that we began to see about Adventism and about truth that Seventh-day Adventists could not see. They're intellectually closed the door to be able to see that. If not making the argument, just to discuss it. If the 2520 is false, or if the 2520 is true, just leaving it at that one way or the other. If it's true, and you decide that it's false, then you've intellectually closed your ability to understand any light that's connected with the 2520, should it be true. Okay, so if you determine that this is false, then you're never going to wrap your mind around all the proofs that it's true, and you're never going to wrap your mind around all the truths that get developed based upon that foundational truth. So this reality is part of what we're grappling with in this history. But I want us to understand the significance of the 126 in terms of opening up this truth. But I want you also to see Hiram Edson's logic is that when this truth does come into history, that the kind of increase of knowledge that it produces is really profound. So when we got to that history, just as an evidence of some truths that began to come to the light that are true, but that the Seventh-day Adventists never have been able to recognize, I'm just going to share some of them with you. This movement has taught for quite some time now, but it's from this revelation of truth post understanding the 2520. We've understood that Daniel chapter 1 is the first angel's message. You're not going to hear that in Adventism, brothers and sisters. Now, you're not going to hear that Daniel chapter 2 is the second angel's message, or that Daniel chapter 3 is the third angel's message. Nor are you going to hear that they're together as a unit. But the Lord has led us to that understanding where we can point by point the characteristics of the three angels' messages in Revelation 14, 6 through 12. We can take those characteristics and lay them over Daniel 1, 2, 3, and it's just airtight. And it's in agreement with what Sister White says, that the books of Daniel and Revelation are the same book. And in the Revelation, the same line of prophecy that's taken up in the book of Daniel is taken up in the book of Revelation, Sister White says. She says they complement one another, and that word complement means bring to perfection. So you should expect to see the same testimony in Daniel as you find in Revelation. And for this is part of the justification for looking at Daniel 1, 2, 3 and seeing the three angels' messages. And all I'm telling you is this is a matter of public record now. But we're understanding these things because of the Lord taking us back to the old path, because of the 126. The coming back to the old path, you're going to be confronted with the 2520, and ultimately you're going to understand that the 2520 for our history is the 126. And when you begin to see, it's from that understanding that ultimately we get to the point to where we can recognize that Genesis 15 is the first angel's message, just like Daniel chapter 1. And Genesis 17 is the second angel's message, just like Daniel chapter 2. And Genesis 22 is the third angel's message, just like Daniel chapter 3. So there's light that begins to open once we go back to the old path that Adventism hasn't been able to see. Such as, Adventism is never marked for us. I'm certain of this, but I'm certain of this. I'll just leave it at that. They've never marked for us that Nebuchadnezzar has two dreams, but so does William Miller. And Nebuchadnezzar's two dreams typify William Miller's two dreams. I'm telling you, Adventism is not to that level. And the only reason that we're at that level is because we return to the old path. Okay, we accepted the 2520. And so when we get to Daniel chapter 4, we know that that's a dream. It's Nebuchadnezzar's second dream. And we know it's about the 2520 because it's about Nebuchadnezzar feeding on the land for 2,520 days. Okay, we understand it. And that's William Miller's, one of William Miller's second witnesses to the 2520 is Daniel chapter 4. But most Adventism thinks that the dream of William Miller in early writings, page 81, is William Miller's only dream. But it isn't. It's his second dream. Just like Daniel 4 is Nebuchadnezzar's second dream. And William Miller's second dream, that's in early writing 71, is about the 25-20. It's about the 7 times scattering, just like Daniel chapter 4 is about the 25-20, about the 7 times scattering. Miller's second dream is been typified by Nebuchadnezzar's second dream, and therefore we should know what Miller's first dream was, because William Miller's first dream was typified by Nebuchadnezzar's first dream. And what's Nebuchadnezzar's first dream? Daniel chapter 2. Okay, so we're at the level of understanding where we're seeing not only the 3 angels' messages in the book of Daniel and Genesis and other places, but we're actually seeing someone like Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar typifying the leadership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, typifying the role of William Miller. So what I'm saying is all these things I just said are a matter of public record, but they don't come into the public record until we get to the time period where the Lion of the tribe of Judah has opened up the 25-20 all over again by taking us to the old paths to recognize these things. So in connection with that, I want to walk us through something that would be really simple. I don't know how long this will take, but some of you that understand what I just said may have difficulty working through this, because I'm going to go through Daniel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, perhaps 3 for sure, maybe all the way to 6. Definitely not to 12, although it'd be good to do it to 12. I'm going to say that this is Daniel 1, 2, 3. Okay, but I'm not worrying about saying that Daniel 1 is the first angel's message and Daniel 2 is the second angel's message and Daniel 3 is the third angel's message. They are. How many understand that? Okay, so that's a matter of public record. What I'm going to say is that Daniel chapter 1 is dealing with the priests, and Daniel chapter 2 is dealing with the Levites, and Daniel chapter 3 is dealing with the Nethinims. Okay, so can symbols have more than one meaning? All right, so I shouldn't be challenging our thought there. And the reason that I want to do that is I want to establish a pattern in these chapters in Daniel that allow us to return to the pattern that I have been beginning to develop here yesterday, day before, and have another line on it, and the other line would be the book of Daniel. Okay, so what this represents up here, I'm saying from here to here, this is Daniel chapter 1, and I'm saying that there's a 10-day testing process in Daniel chapter 1, where at the end of 10 days, they're going to be investigated on whether they're fairer and fatter in flesh than the other class of worshipers. But we know that this is over, Daniel chapter 1 is over a 3-year period. And at the end of the days, then Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're going to be brought in before Nebuchadnezzar and be tested to how well they did during this 3 years of study. Okay? And they're going to be found to be 10 times better by Nebuchadnezzar than everyone else. And then I'm going to say here that in Daniel chapter 2, which is the dream of the image, that you've reached this point in history where the image test begins. Okay? But I'm going to point out for you, if you're willing to see, that God's people here, as represented by Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, however you want to put it, God's people in Daniel chapter 2 that are illustrated here, they are a people that are God's people, and I'm saying they're Levites, but the story is that there's already a prophetic controversy that has taken place that is life and death in its nature. Okay? So what I'm saying is there's a prophetic controversy here in the history of the priests that in Daniel chapter 2, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're representing God's people who up to that point in time have not recognized the prophetic crisis, and they recognize it when it's already become a life or death issue. Okay, Arioch comes in and says, you may not know it, but you've already been assigned to die because you're a wise man and you can't solve Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And Daniel says, no, wait a second. I'm a Levite. Let me go to the Lord and see if he can't help. All right, he doesn't say that, but you get what I'm saying. Here, these 4 illustrations are an illustration of people that aren't involved in the initial prophetic argument that has brought the crisis. Are you following me? That's the Levites, is it not? Okay, but they have to be awakened to the crisis, and they get awakened kind of like instantaneously. So I'm saying that Daniel chapter 2 with the image test is right where it would be in our structure, and it leads to Daniel chapter 3, the blue. I'm saying that the people that are going to respond to that test, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that are going to refuse to bow down to the image, at that point, they're representing the Nethinims, okay? Well, why would they do that when they are definitely Jews? Okay, I'm saying they're doing it because this is the present truth message for the hour. Priests, Levites, Nethinims, okay? And Sister White repeatedly says the image test on the plain of Dura is the Sunday law. And we know at the Sunday law, this is where the 11th hour workers, God's 1 hour laborers, respond, which we're calling Nethinims. So I'm saying you can take Daniel chapter 1, 2, 3 and also put him over here and not worry about saying this is the first angel's message, second angel's message, or third angel's message, but glean from that sequence of chapters an overview of this process that we're looking at of the development of priests, Levites, and Nethinims. Everyone following my logic? And then I'm saying you can go back in and you can take chapter 4 and you can put it in this history, and chapter 5 in this history, and chapter 6 in this history. Okay, repeat and enlarge. And what is chapter 4? Chapter 4 is the link between Millerite history and our history. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar's in chapter 4, isn't this great Babylon that I have built? Doesn't he say something like that? That I have built. And what did Adventism do in 1863? It rebuilt Jericho. Okay, and it's proud about it. It's proud about it. Go to the theologians in Andrews and ask them, do they think we should still use these charts? And they're going to laugh at you and say, no, we set these charts aside a long time ago. Okay, what they've accepted in place of this message, they're proud about. Nebuchadnezzar was proud about the work that he did, but he's going to go through a judgment beginning in 1863 that he's going to live as an animal until 1989 or until 2014. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because you got 2:126. One's going to take you to 1989, the time of the end. The other's going to take you to 2014. But can you have two ending points like that? Go to Daniel chapter 1, just to remind you of something from, maybe not remind you of, but this is something that was put in the public record many times through the years, not so much in the recent years. But you'll notice that in Daniel chapter 1, verse 18, it says, now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Now what I'm wanting you to see there is at the end of the days. Okay? So what are the days that are ended at that point? It's 3 years, and in verse 5, it says, the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. So the end of the days is the end of the 3 years. And I'm saying this is the 3 years in this history, that this is Daniel chapter 1. And you got a repeat and enlarge going on in here, because you have a process, whatever your starting point here is, and I'm saying it's 9/11, but we'll put that in later. You have a point where Daniel's forming his conclusion that he's not going to eat of the table of the king's meat. And at the same time, the Lord is bringing Daniel into favor with Melzar, so he can actually test out his desire to eat pulse and drink water. So I don't know how long it was, but I'm saying there is a period of time noted. If you're going to be technical to Daniel chapter 1, there's a period of time from here when Daniel chapter 1 begins until Melzar has agreed, okay, we're going to put you on a 10-day test. I just wanted you to see this little break in time. Do you see it? Do you see that I have justification for marking a break in there? All right. And then the test is formulated. You're going to have a 10-day test. And at the end of the 10 days, then you're going to be tested to see if you can see the distinction between those that eat the king's meat and those that don't eat the king's meat. When can you see the distinction? When can you see the distinction? At the end. How to ask this question? Never mind. I'll come back to that question. That's a hard question. Anyway, what I want you to see first off, before we worry about when you can see the distinction, is that in Daniel chapter 1, at the level I'm teaching it right now, there is a repeat and enlarge. Daniel and Melzar form their relationship this period of time. Then there's a 10-day test. They're tested here, end of story. But in Daniel chapter 1, you also have a secondary story of 3 years. Well, actually, the one would probably over here include the whole year, but you get my point. 1 year, 2 year. Here's the end of the 3rd year. So you have a 3-year period, and within it, you have this 10-day preceded by a little period of time. You see it? You see the repeat and enlarge, okay? I have a reason, of course, for putting that in place. And then here's where he's going in before Nebuchadnezzar, and you're going to be tested, and how much smarter is he? 20 times? 5 times? 10 times? And how much brighter are the jewels when they're cast back into the casket? It's 10 times brighter. Of course, I'm going to try to plug this in here. And I'm going to say that in this history from midnight to the midnight cry, that it takes us to the image of the beast test, which is the introduction of the story of the Levites. Okay? And what is it? I probably can't get too far outside, delve with all these nice little nuances, but in any case, let me take you back to my point. Verse 18, at the end of the days, okay, but go to chapter 4, verse 33 or 34, chapter 4, verse 33 or 34, we will see in a minute. 34, and at the end of the days. You see that, verse 34? So there's an end of the days in chapter 1 of Daniel, and the end of the days is the end of this 3 years, and at the end of the 3 years, there's going to be a test. And what is the test about? It's a test about aptitude that they've gleaned or developed during this 3-year period. Okay, and if you're already probably running ahead of me, if I put 9/11 here and put midnight here, then this 3-year period is what? It's 3 years of 50. 50, 50, 50 is 150. I'm not worried about making the years 50. I'm just saying the 150 fits in here, right? Yes? Okay, so I'm saying there's also good, in this period from 9/11 to midnight, there's also going to be a point in here at the end of the 10 where you'll be able to see the difference between a wheat and a tare. You can tell what food you've been eating. Okay, before that time you couldn't tell. Okay, you couldn't tell. So in the agriculture model, if this is 9/11 as I'm proposing, and if this is midnight, is there a point in this history from 9/11 to midnight where the subject of your ability to identify a distinction between a tare and a wheat comes into this history? If so, when is it? And what would be the agricultural justification for making that claim? Pardon me? 2014, you're going to go with 2014. All right. 2014. Why? This way, Mark, if it's 2014, what distinction is it making between this period of time and this period of time? Early rain. What do we call the earlier? Former rain. Former rain. I want to keep the same symbols. Former rain from here to here, and then latter rain from here to here. What's the former rain for in terms of agriculture? To germinate, get the plants popping out of the ground. What's the latter rain for? To ripen it. It's already there, but now the ripening process. When is it that you can tell the difference between a wheat and a tare? It's in that time period when they're both coming to maturity. In this time period, when we're having the argument about whether or not you can see wheat and tares, you're in the time period of the latter rain for the priest. And now you can tell that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's flesh is fairer and fatter than those people that haven't been eating the same food that was delivered to them when Christ comes down out of heaven with the hidden manna in his hand. Because that's what this is. It's about what you're going to eat. All right. So I suppose most of you are already familiar with this parallel, but I do want you to see that. But go one more place. If you haven't, if I'm losing you with too many words, one of the things I'm trying to nail down now is that in chapter 1, there's the end of the days, and it's at the end of these 3-year period. And in chapter 4, there's an end of the days, and it's the end of what? It's the end of the 25-20. Is it not? It's the end of the 7 times. So the end of the days can be 1798, couldn't it? Wouldn't it, if the end of the days is a symbol? And I suppose, I've been chastised a little bit in a friendly way, that some people question whether I use 2 witnesses correctly. They're saying, Brother Jeff, if you have this here, and you bring this here and say, this is a felt pen and this is a felt pen, here's 2 witnesses to prove what a felt pen looks like, even if it has a different color, most people that listen to me will say, amen. But I get chastised, because this is something that you're trying to prove. And you need 2 witnesses to prove it. You need this witness, and you need this witness. Okay? You need 2 witnesses to prove this point. So I'm claiming that the end of the days is a symbol. And all I've shown you is 2 witnesses. Daniel chapter 1, 18, and Daniel chapter 4, verse 34. But let's go to Daniel 12, because this will give us a second witness. The very last verse, the very last thing that is said in the book of Daniel, would that mean something? If the rule of first mention means something, and the fact that Jesus illustrates the end with the beginning, does the end have any special importance? The last thing that Daniel speaks of is the end of the days. He says, but go thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of the days. First, you have to determine the context of the passage, right? Can't just make an application. So what's the context of this passage? Well, probably a lot. I'm going to give you the context I'm wanting you to answer. Let's read verse 11. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waiteth and cometh to the 1,335 days. But go thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of the days. So by the original purpose or original thought, however we express that, what's Daniel saying here at the basic level in his understanding, in terms of what is the end of the days? No, a prophetic period coming to the end, perhaps. That's not it. It's not it accurately.
Time of the end?
There's only 2 time prophecies that are being discussed here, right? A 1290 that ends in 1798 and a 1334 that ends in 1844, 1335 that ends in 1844. So it gives you 2 time prophecies in this verse, one that ends in 1798, one that ends in 1844, and he says, but go thy way and rest till the end be, and you're going to stand in your lot at the end of the days. What are the days by context that this is addressing? It's addressing the time prophecy that ends in 1798 and the time prophecy that ends in 1844, is it not? Okay, which is the 2520, it's also the 2300, it's also the 1335, and it's the 1260 that ends in 1798 or the 1290 that ends in 1798. All I'm wanting you to see here is that when Daniel stands in his lot at the end of the days is a symbol in prophecy. Gave you 3 witnesses that marks the end of a prophecy. Okay? For Daniel chapter 1, how long is the prophecy? 3 years. Okay, at the end of 3 years is the end of the days. In Daniel chapter 4, it's the end of the 2520, which would be the time of the end, 1798 for the Millerites, 1989 for us. But here in Daniel 12, it could be 1798 or 1989 for us, and also 1844, or what for us? Okay, so when we project these to the future, not dealing with the 2520, but the 126, then the ends of the 126, you will also see Daniel standing in his lot. Are you following the logic? Daniel was standing in his lot in 1989, the end of the 126, in agreement with the passages where he's standing in his lot in 1798, which is the end of the days, or the end of Nebuchadnezzar's 7 times. But Daniel's also standing in his lot in 2014, because you have a 126 that ends in 2014, do you not? Okay, so I want you to see that before we proceed, that Daniel's standing in his lot here. But if my sister is correct, and this is the point in this history, which we're lining up with Daniel chapter 1, where Melzar can see the distinction between this class has been eating this food and this class has been eating this food, she's making that claim, I assume, because this is latter rain time period. Now the rain is just bringing the conclusion of the growth process about for the harvest that's about to happen. And in this history is when you begin to see the difference between the wheat's maturity and the tare's maturity. So I want you to see that Daniel chapter 1 is in agreement with this agricultural model that we've been dealing with. And we started at 10, right? And we have to stop at 11:30 or 11? 11, okay. All right, so let's remind ourselves of something. Are you following my logic? What is this? Now, I'll just, rather than lay the line over, let's walk. I've already started. I'll just walk through it and put it in place. What I'm saying is Daniel chapter 1 is in agreement with the line that we've been dealing with so far these days. Starting point 9/11. What's my justification for putting Daniel chapter 1 at 9/11? It's a first angel's message, but by the context of Daniel chapter 1, what's my justification for doing that? At 9/11, a mighty angel comes down out of heaven and he has a hidden manna in his hand, and what's your responsibility? To take and eat it. Is not Daniel chapter 1 about what you're going to eat? Okay, but the hidden manna for us at 9/11 is the little book for the Millerites. It's the bread of heaven for the time of Christ, and it's the manna for the time of Moses. And the manna for the time of Moses, the bread of heaven for the time of Christ, and the little book for the Millerites was always a test. Therefore, the hidden manna is a test. Okay? So is there a testing process illustrated in Daniel chapter 1 that has to do with eating. Okay, I was looking for a better word. Yes, there is, okay? But there's a period of time before the testing process is put in place of 10 days. Okay, so I'm saying that this period of time is 9/11 to 2004. And that from 2004 till the completion of the temple, this 10 years, is that 10 days of testing that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel were going through. And that testing was based upon what diet they chose to eat, okay? So, and that's exactly what we've been understanding about our history. So we come to midnight, yes, and here's the doors going to close, and the wise priests now have a headache, and the foolish priests have a headache. Their probation's closed for certain in all regards. We're still unsure what it means about the door closing for the wise priests, all the implications of that. But in this history, I've been arguing that this is where a first fruit offering is lifted up, okay? As illustrated by Christ, the first fruit offering being lifted up on the cross. And I've been arguing that this here is where we ended yesterday. It's the opening of the seventh seal, where fire is taken off the altar and cast down to earth in response to God's people's prayers. And I didn't take time with this yesterday, but in the Solomon's temple, which is getting built here, there's fire going to come down and consume the offering. There's a manifestation of power of God in the temple, and then there's going to be a fire that comes down and consumes the offering of Solomon's temple. But what happens in between the dedication and the fire coming down on the offering is Solomon's classic prayer. Solomon's prayer at the temple dedication is introduced, and when his prayer's finished, then the fire comes down out of heaven on the offering. And I'm saying that in Revelation 8:1, in the opening of the seventh seal, it's clearly in response to the prayers of God's people that the fire is taken off the altar and cast down to the earth. Okay, and this casting down is the same expression in William Miller's dream, where the jewels are cast into the casket without any apparent help or whatever. And when they're cast into the casket, how bright do they shine? 10 times. Okay, so I'm saying this is Daniel chapter 1 all over again that takes us to here. And this would be the midnight cry. And we have understood that the midnight cry is the image of the beast test. But we're now understanding in these histories that there's internal and external. And I want to point out to you that it's not just a coincidence, but it is outside the scope of what we're studying, that if this is Daniel chapter 2, then this is Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Yes? And it's which dream? It's his first dream in chapter 2. His second dream's in chapter 4. Okay, so if this is his first dream, then what dream would it be of William Miller? His first dream. And so I'm arguing that William Miller's dream will have to also have something to do with this image test, the first dream, even as does William Miller's second dream. But William Miller's first dream is about this image. And what's he going to do with this dream? He's going to corrupt it, is he not? He's going to ultimately, he's going to build an image that's all gold. He don't want to see these other kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar, yes. Oh, but I say Miller, I'm sorry. Okay, so what I'm wanting you to see is when we bring the Miller and Daniel down to our history, that here in this history we already understand is where the testing process of the combination of the church and state begins to get underway. Image of the beast test, we get that. We understand that this is the animals getting on the ark. There's your beasts getting on the ark, testing process. Are you going to see what's going to happen? But externally, what I want you to see is from the midnight cry to the Sunday law, you have parallel kingdoms. I'm not talking about the joining of the two sticks of the northern and southern kingdom. I'm talking about the parallel kingdoms of the 6th and 7th kingdom of Bible prophecy. And here is where the 6th kingdom is going down, and here's where the 7th kingdom is going up. By the time you get here, the 7th kingdom's underway. And who do we understand is going to be controlling the 7th kingdom of Bible prophecy? Donald Trump. Trump or the United States, any way you want to put it, the kingdom or the president of the United States that is the premier king of the 10 kings is the United States. So right here, the 7th kingdom is fully underway. But in this history, there's a transition between two kingdoms, right? What has to happen to someone like Donald Trump and the country of the United States between here and here? Okay, bad question on my part. Yes, dictatorship. Lots of things come in. What I was looking at, and I don't know how to ask the question. Trump, the United States, maybe they won't overtly do this, but they are going to have to determine that they want to take control of the world. They're going to have to determine that for the best possible motives, perhaps, that the world's going out of control because of radical Islam or whatever. They may have what appears to be good human motives, but they're going to have to determine, no, we are going to set ourselves up as the controlling influence of the one world government, which is the United Nations. There has to be that kind of design in place. So I'm saying in this history, in Daniel chapter 2, when we see Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and it's the dream of this image, and we know from inspiration that from that dream, ultimately Nebuchadnezzar decides, no, I want to be a one world government. I don't like this. It's going to be all Babylon. It's going to be all gold. That it's speaking, Daniel chapter 2 is speaking to the very motivation that takes place in the transition from the United States, 6th kingdom, United Nations, 7th kingdom. So did that make sense to you? Okay, all right. So when you come here, I'm saying that this is, of course, Daniel chapter 3. But let's look at Daniel chapter 2 briefly. I didn't spend a lot of time giving you my arguments on why we would start Daniel chapter 1 here. Brothers and sisters, we start Daniel chapter 1 here because of the eating test. If we walk through it, we can give you lots of references that allow you to put it 9/11. But why would we put Daniel chapter 2 at the midnight cry? That's where I'm putting it. If you're not colorblind like me, from here it's red, okay? From here it's blue. This is black. So I'm saying this is Daniel chapter 2 here. And so what is my justification for putting Daniel chapter 2 at the midnight cry? There are several. I just give you a couple. Because I really don't want to spend a lot of time on Daniel to get to my point. Verse 1 of Daniel chapter 2. And if any of you are English teachers, you gotta correct verse 1. There's something, it's probably absolutely perfect English. Don't take me seriously on that, but it doesn't seem right. And in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Do people wake up at the midnight cry? Oh, okay, sleep break from him. But did you ever notice the doubling of Nebuchadnezzar in there? Yeah. Nebuchadnezzar, isn't there another way to say that where you wouldn't have to spell out Nebuchadnezzar twice? That's a big name. Nebuchadnezzar. Is there a doubling that we often see at the midnight cry? Okay. Is there an awakening at the midnight cry? Okay, so there's other justification if we walk through that for saying that this is the history of the Levites is what I'm saying, the second phase of the judgment. Let me just glance through this to make sure I put everything in it. I need to read it to you. You probably understood my logic. So maybe I don't need to read it, but I'll run the logic by you again. I'm not saying this is the first, second, and third angel's message now about Daniel 1, 2, and 3. It is, but this is a different application of that particular symbol. I'm saying that here in Daniel chapter 2, this is the reaping, I guess, of the Levites, all right? And that this is the reaping of the Nethinims. And that one of the arguments that sustains my claim that this is the Levites is the crisis that they're confronted with. In our history right now, we see a crisis coming, don't we? A really bad crisis. It's a really bad crisis because we know from inspiration, when is the crisis? It's at midnight. Isn't the crisis in inspiration, doesn't it take place at midnight? So we know we have a crisis coming at midnight, and we understand November 9th of this year to be midnight. And what else do we understand about a crisis? Character's never developed in a crisis. It's only manifested in a crisis. So we have a crisis coming, and it's an extra special crisis because we really don't even know what the crisis is yet, right? Can you get anyone in this movement? I can't. Can you get anyone in this movement at this point to say, okay, tell me all the details that we should expect to take place on November 9th? Okay, it's a crisis even in that regard because we don't even have clarity about what the crisis is supposed to be. But we know it's coming, right? And we have enough information to be prepared because the Lion of the tribe of Judah is giving us just exactly what we need. I'm not complaining. But put yourself now in the Levites' shoes. Right here, they get awoken. Knock on the door. Here's Arioch. You're a wise man. You're going to die. You already have a death warrant out for you. I'm coming to arrest you, to kill you. Well, why? Why are you going to kill me? Because there is a crisis going on in the kingdom over prophecy. And no one can give the king the correct interpretation of prophecy. So they get hit with a crisis right at the beginning that they didn't even see coming in this story. I'm saying that's what happens to the Levites. Okay, I'm not saying that the Levites aren't watching stuff develop, but you get my point, right? Okay, so let's at least look at a little bit of that so you know that I'm not totally fabricating this. Verse 13 of chapter 2. Well, let's start in verse 12. For this cause the king was angry and very furious and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. And the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. So this prophetic dilemma that produces the persecution, that produces the crisis, takes place before they even know about it. We know about it. We're in it. We're watching it develop. We're priests. But the Levites, they get hit with it right here in Daniel chapter 2. They come out on the right side of the issue, but it's different for them than for us. We're kind of concerned about where we're at, but we're better off. We're better off. To be forewarned is to be forearmed. Is that how it goes? Okay. They would have had the ability to be forewarned, but for whatever reason, they're not listening right now. Okay. So you understand the dynamics that I'm saying is in Daniel chapter 2 that represents the Levite situation. I don't really need to read that much more in there, but let me show you one more thing, if I can, from Daniel 2. Verse 28. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter, and he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee. I went at verse 28, I'm sorry. Yeah, I started verse 28 and I jumped down into verse 29. Okay, let's start verse 28 all over again. Sorry. But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and maketh known to Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Point, simple point. Scripture tells us that this story is for our history. This is latter day history. Okay, even if it had a fulfillment then, and in Millerite history, it's more about our history. So where are you going to put it in our history? Who is it that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel represent in Daniel chapter 2 when there is already a life and death prophetic controversy that has pushed the government, the United States, to already be taking legal actions on this prophetic religious worship study before the Levites even know about it? Okay? You with me on that? Say amen?
Amen. So that kind of means that it starts happening before November 9th, possibly? Or
What starts before?
if not the persecution, but whatever it is that causes the persecution, it sounds like this stuff leading up to it, or is that where it starts?
No, I think you seem to be talking about the priests, and I'm talking about the Levites.
I'm talking about the Levites. I mean, no matter what it is, you're saying they wake up at midnight.
I'm saying they wake up at the midnight cry.
Okay, yes.
Okay?
Yeah, midnight cry, I'm sorry. Go.
So there is another. I'm glad that you brought that up because it allowed me to think. There's another point in Daniel 2 that we need to put in place. Yes.
Because you're saying not November 9th, but then because November 9th.
Yeah, I may have not did it well. What I was trying to say is we as priests are better off, even though we don't fully understand what's going to happen November 9th. We know something's coming at November 9th that is life and death serious. But the Levites are going to get confronted with this issue after the test is already underway, and they have to make the right choice then and there. They don't have any advance. I mean, brothers and sisters, if you're holding on to sin right now, you're going to be probably lost if you don't put it away before Jesus comes. Okay, that's what you would say over the past 30 years of this message. But you're not going to say that now. You're going to say the same thing, but you're going to say, brothers and sisters, if you have sin in your life and you're holding on to it, if you have not overcome that sin before November 9th, you're going to be lost. That's a bit different than just putting it off, well, you have to overcome it before Jesus returns. That's pretty much God's love and mercy. The priests get forewarned. The Levites wake up, the test is already underway. Right? Isn't that how you're seeing it? Okay, now there's one other factor of Daniel 2 I want to put in place here. And it's, you know this story. I'm going to hold you all accountable for knowing the basic structure of Daniel 2. Is that fair? Okay, you know this story. So let's go to verse 44. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Now, there was a point in time where at the school of the prophets, things were happening really fast, and we reached one subject. People may not know this behind the scenes, but one subject came into the school of prophets a handful of years ago, and it caused the wheel to come off the axle for a lot of people. Okay, and it was Daniel chapter 2. People may not realize that. There was a struggle going on about Daniel chapter 2, and people lost their way on it. Some people lost their way on it. And in that time period, there was at least 3 or 4 various applications of Daniel 2 that we were grappling with, and one of them that Pippenger has, that used to be a heartburn for me, but it wasn't a big deal because I followed his logic, is he's going to say in the days of these kings that this is talking about the 10 European kings of Daniel 7. And he can establish that. That's pioneer understanding. This is an agreement with, look at where they're putting this. They're putting it right next to here, to Daniel 7, where you have these 10 kings. That's not an accident on their part. Okay, so Pippenger has his valid logic for doing that, but I use the quote that some of you are familiar with, that we're now living in the toes of this statue, and the iron and clay represent the combination of churchcraft and statecraft, and so I would argue, from my understanding, that these toes are at the end of the world during the testing time where you have church and state coming together, iron and clay. So you got to, there's a couple other approaches you could throw in there as well, but what I'm saying is what we're understanding now, what I'm understanding now, is that my focus, as it's presenting the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy, was to see this beast and say it's the papal beast. But when you come into the message of the seventh kingdom of Bible prophecy, the focus is not on the papal beast, it's on the secular 10-king beast, okay, the civil part of it. And this is where Parmender's being prepared to understand, is this seventh kingdom. So he's seeing these 10 kings as these 10 European kings that receive a deadly wound in 1798, but these 10 European kings, deadly wounds are going to be healed down here in our history because Donald Trump's going to unite them again into a one world government. Okay, so that's the logic there. And I'm not going there. There is something that I need for you to see, though, that is here that you have to understand in this context. What I'm saying is Daniel chapter 2 is this history. And when it says in the days of these kings, it's talking about the time period where these end of the world 10 kings of Revelation 17 are going to come together. That's just exactly what we understand. Is that this is the end of the sixth, the beginning of the seventh. This is here where these 10 kings, the perfect fulfillment of the 10 kings are coming into place. So therefore, when Daniel 2:44 says, in the days of these kings, here, you see it? The days begin here. They may go all the way down here to this time period, 7 last plagues, but they begin here prophetically. In the days of these kings, what is God going to do? He's going to set up a kingdom. What's it mean that he's going to set up a kingdom? And when does Sister White say that he will set up his kingdom? Using verse 44 as she makes this statement. During the time period of the latter rain, God sets up his kingdom. When did the latter rain begin? You're saying 2014. Okay, we'll let you get by with that. 9/11, okay. Former rain, she's going to latter rain. I'm just saying now we're talking about a more generic application. In the days of the latter rain, this is all the days of the latter rain here. God's going to set up a kingdom. What's the kingdom that he's going to set up? Well, in Daniel chapter 2, right, this is where we're at. There's a rock that's cut out of the mountain, right? There's that kingdom getting set up. And it's going to be in controversy with the kingdoms represented by that statue. In this history, God's kingdom gets set up. And I'm arguing that the point of reference is found in Ezra 7:9, among other things. It gets set up on the first day of the 5th month, when Ezra gets to Jerusalem. And when Jerusalem is going to be passed by, Jerusalem old, and Jerusalem new is now a church triumphant that is set up for this crisis that we're entering into. That's Daniel chapter 2. And in Daniel chapter 2, when the kingdom is set up, the Levites are brought in because God wants both priests and Levites managing this temple as he goes through this warfare to the end of time. So when you get to Daniel chapter 3, I hope it's pretty familiar with you that Sister White over and over again talks about Nebuchadnezzar's image on the plain of Dura typifying the Sunday law. Okay, so if we have lines of prophecy, not this line, other lines of prophecy that deal with this history, and we do, that demonstrate 4 gatherings, but I'm going to keep it at 3. Gathering of the priests, Levites, and Nethinims. I'm not denying a gathering of the 144,000, but if you have other lines where these 3 entities are gathered into the fold, then it's acceptable to, I believe, to put Daniel 1, 2, 3 over the top here. Say this is where the priests get gathered, this is where the Levites get gathered, and this is where the Nethinims get gathered. And I'm only going through that logic to say that this is why I am saying that in Daniel chapter 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego represent the Nethinims. I realize they're the same men that were in chapter 2 and chapter 1, but by the context of where we're laying this out at the Sunday law, They're the ones that are faithful there at the Sunday law. The priests and Levites will be faithful too. I'm not denying that. But you see the distinction that I'm making. Okay, I'm not going to have the time, but I'll at least walk you through it. Daniel chapter 4 is Nebuchadnezzar is getting struck down in 1863 because he rebuilt Jericho. He built this great Babylon. And he's going to wake up at the end of 7 times. And when Nebuchadnezzar wakes up from his condition, I'm not saying wake up like sleep in the parable of 10 virgins. He's going to, at the end of the 20 days of his punishment, who's there waiting for him? Daniel. Now that doesn't, what is that teaching you about the prophecy in terms of if Nebuchadnezzar's 7 times begins in 1863 and it ends in 1989 at the time of the end, what happens in 1989? Daniel's there. Daniel's there. And when it comes to Daniel 12:13, which we've already read here, when it comes to Daniel 12:13, you realize there's 3, maybe 4 correct ways to apply Daniel 12:13 in terms of Daniel standing in his lot. What are the ways that we can define prophetically Daniel standing in his lot? What does it mean prophetically? There's more than one way. Number 1, Sister White says, when a man stands in his, like Daniel stood in his lot, waiting to fulfill his purpose. Okay, so at one level, Daniel standing at his lot is talking about the book of Daniel fulfilling its purpose. So if you have Nebuchadnezzar marking Adventism in 1863, that's going to be scattered until 1989. In 1989, when Nebuchadnezzar's coming back to life, Daniel's waiting there for him. And what's Daniel there to do? He's there to fulfill his purpose. And what was the book of Daniel's purpose in 1989? To explain what just went on in 1989 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it fits there. What's another application? What's the most often correct application for Daniel standing in his lot? Sister White uses this one. She uses the fulfill the purpose too. The judgment. The books are open. The lot, the word lot there is a biblical word that is used for casting lots. And casting lots is judgment. Daniel's going to stand in his lot, which also means grave. Okay, I'm not denying that. At the end of days, and therefore it's saying that Daniel is going to be resurrected at one level in his grave, or that his name is going to come up in the judgment. And so when would his name come up in the judgment? October 22nd, 1844, Daniel standing in his lot at the end of the days. So we can put him at the end of that 2520, that 2300, or we could put him at 2014, because 2014 has been typified by October 22nd, 1844, when the judgment of the dead began. Okay? What about him being in his grave? Go thou rest, Daniel. Rest in your grave, but you're going to stand in your lot at the end of the days. And that's a correct application. When is it that Daniel gets resurrected? We may not know because, Moses is already resurrected. We know about that. I'm not arguing maybe Daniel is one of the judges in the heavenly sanctuary, so forget that possibility. When is it, without those kind of caveats, that Daniel's going to get resurrected? The first resurrection. When is that? Okay, let's just put it at the second coming. At the second coming, Daniel's going to stand in his lot. I'm hoping what I'm trying to get you to see is that Daniel is going to be at all these waymarks. He's going to be at all these waymarks at the end of every prophecy. How many examples have I given you already today? He's going to be at the end of the 1290. That's Daniel 12, which means that he's also going to be at the end of the 1260. But the 1260 is just half of the 2520. So he's going to be at the end of the 2520 that ends in 1798, but he's going to be at the end of the 2520 that ends in 1844 because he's going to stand in his lot when judgment begins. But he's going to be in 1844 anyway because he's there at the end of the 1335. Okay, so any way you want to look at it, Daniel's fulfilling a purpose at these waymarks. So Daniel's going to be fulfilling purposes all the way through here too, right? At least the waymarks that we can connect with, like the 126, and so on and so forth. So in Daniel chapter 4, you have the connection between Millerite history and our history. Because when Nebuchadnezzar comes to, Daniel's waiting for him in 1989. There's the connection. Now we're moving into our history. And at that point, I don't know how much further to go on this, but in Daniel chapter 5, does 5 follow 4? Does Sister White say that Nebuchadnezzar, the first king, typified Belshazzar, the last king? Yes, she says that. And if you didn't follow my logic, what I'm saying is that Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 4 is representing the leadership of Adventism, let's say James White, in 1863. And in 1989, leadership of Adventism is coming up different now. This isn't old. This is someone that's there waiting and wanting Daniel's support. Is Nebuchadnezzar understood to be a saved man? Okay, so he comes up in a different condition than his grandson. Okay, so we got Daniel chapter 4 taking us to Daniel chapter 5. And what's Daniel chapter 5? It's the end of Adventism. It's Belshazzar. And what is going to mark the end of Adventism in the story of Daniel chapter 5 is the handwriting on the wall. And the handwriting on the wall, it can be understood to be the 2520 because the many tekel upharsin equates to that very thing. It's from that very thing that we derive the 126. So here we see leadership of Adventist Church at a point in history after 1989. And they're being confronted with the handwriting on the wall, and they don't understand the handwriting on the wall. And what is the handwriting on the wall that is not understood by the leadership of Adventism here at the end of the world? It's this handwriting on the wall that is standing as a judgment against them. It's the two symbols of the covenant relationship that he entered into with modern Israel. He gave them 2 tables just like he gave 2 tables to ancient Israel. The 2 tables of the 10 Commandments typify the 2 tables of Habakkuk. And they gave him these 2 tables, gave us these 2 tables as a symbol of our covenant relationship, which we broke in 1863. And when it comes time for Belshazzar to be judged by the sins of his fathers at the end of the world, which would be post 2001, because Belshazzar is not going to be confronted with the sins of his fathers until the sins of his fathers are brought to light. And they're not brought to light until the Lord leads his people back to the old paths. And when they get to the old paths, then they can see the 2520, then they can see the 126, then they can see the connection between Daniel and our history. And now you're here, post-2001, and these 2 tables become present truth, not only in this movement, but around the world. In this movement, I guess is what I should say. And this is the handwriting on the wall of Daniel chapter 5 that brings to a conclusion the leadership of Adventism as it's passed by and the Lord enters into covenant with those that we call the 144,000. And I'm saying now, just so you see, that Daniel chapter 4 brings us into 1989. You follow that? 126 years from 1863 to 1989. But it also takes us to 2014, because the 126 that begins in 1888 brings us into here. So we come into here on Daniel chapter 4, and in here, Daniel chapter 5 is announcing what? The end of Belshazzar. Who's Belshazzar? He's the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. And what does Daniel say to Belshazzar? though you knew all this, though you knew Millerite history, yet you still persisted in your rebellion. And right here, it's all over. I mean, it's all over. There's still a process of the fall all the way to the Sunday law. But right here, brothers and sisters, this first Sunday law in the United States that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is going to agree to, that's the end of the road. Okay? And at that point in time, God is going to set up a kingdom, the kingdom of Daniel 2 here, and get his priests and his Levites ready for this crisis. Okay? So there's more to say about this, because you can see Daniel not getting lifted up so much as in other places, but in here, he's being marked as being 10 times more informed about prophecy than anyone else. But here, in Daniel chapter 2, they're going to get promoted in the kingdom. Promoted in the kingdom. They're getting lifted up. And here they're going to get lifted up again, aren't they? And when they get lifted up in this history as the ensign, who's with them? Christ is with them. So virtually every nuance that we would teach about this history in terms of priests, Levites, and Nethinims, you can take it all the way through Daniel 12. But you can show it Daniel 1 through 3, Daniel 4 through 6. So I wanted to put that in place because I want you to see this structure here that we're dealing with when we return to it this afternoon. That this structure of Daniel chapter 1 is the same structure I've been dealing with the past couple days. You see it? I mean, it's pretty easy to see, right? Anyway, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the sacred Sabbath hours, that you will give us a double blessing if we will avail ourselves of it. We thank you for the times in which we're living, that we can ask for the latter rain and know that you're going to pour it out upon us. We ask you now for that. We ask for the double blessing, the latter rain, and your presence here throughout the rest of this day, that what is done would glorify and honor you, and that what is taught would be edifying for your people, that they might be about their business of presenting this final warning message to the souls that you've been given to each of us to be responsible for. Please bless this day, bless our fellowship and our understanding, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.